Welcome to an overview of Unifi NVR. Today we're going to be looking at the Unifi NVR, a small form factor NVR that you can buy for about $330 to $50 depending on availability. And it's slightly larger than a regular 3.5-inch hard drive. Offers you ability to connect, according to them, 50-ish cameras, but I would never use that many cameras with this little thing. General rule is to go 10, maybe 15 cameras deployment with this thing, and not much more than that. We're not going to go into the setup of the NVR. There's plenty of videos on that. Their quick start guide is fairly decent, that you could take it and run with it if you've never had any experience using this. I will say this, I love the ability to run the NVR as a custom server on a VM, on a dedicated machine, anywhere you really want. It is flexible and is amazing as far as scalability goes. It is a closed system, which means it doesn't really like to play well with other NVR systems and other IP cameras out there. There's no on-with support. While there is RSTP stream, you could do that, but the lack of on-with is a big deal. And the image quality is not the greatest. The night vision wasn't the greatest. You know, the sensors are what they are, and they do the job for a relatively low amount of money that from there you would spend a lot more money on. They compete with other Chinese cameras, but I like their systems because they're well designed, and the security, if you follow Unifi line, is okay as long as you never ever leave anything on its default credentials, of course. That has been proven to be Achilles' heel to many manufacturers, starting from the highest ones to the lowest ones. Manufacturers of these devices are fairly lazy when it comes to upgrading firmware and software. However, Unifi has been on fire, and they are pushing updates left and right to all of their devices all the time, and I really appreciate that more than anything. And they are keeping up with the times. If you follow their update line and use recommended guidelines, such as changing your default passwords and everything, of course, you should be okay for the most part. Now, having said that, let's go into the Unifi video and mess around. I'm using my own house as a experiment here. We're gonna go into these cameras and see what we can do. Alright, so these are all Generation 3 cameras now. I've recently changed from Generation 2 to Generation 3 cameras. Generation 2 cameras, all 8 of them that you see here, were working just fine. There was absolutely no need to change them, except Generation 3 came out and there's better picture quality, a lot more that came with this generation. So I'm running the 352 firmware on these cameras. I don't necessarily always want to run the greatest and the latest one until all the bugs are worked out, and until I am sure that it will not affect the cameras in a negative way. Sometimes I experiment at home, of course, but for customers, I'm at least 1 or 2 bleeding edge firmwares behind, because they come rapidly. My NVR though is 6361 here, but my cameras are on 352. I run these cameras off the Unifi switch. They are 24 volt passive, and if you want to deploy a large number of them, you really need a Unifi switch or edge switch for that matter, something that can supply you with 24 volts passive, something which is unique really to their line, as it doesn't really play well with other PoE switches. Their switches are also relatively cheap compared to some other offerings. So let's just leave that at that. So let's dig in and take a look at the video and what we can do with it. Just general guide. All right, so let's overview this area over here. Video resolution, override suggested settings. Let's dig in. By default, it wants to record at 15 FPS. Professional videos, when deployed, usually for storage purposes, they go down to 7 FPS, 5 to 7 FPS. Systems, Axis, and Sony cameras. But this is my home. I can do whatever I want. I don't really care about storage or longevity. I can do a couple of weeks of recording if necessary on this thing, and no big deal. This is not out in the field. And I like higher FPS because it gives it a smoother look and feel. Then we have on-screen display. Of course, override message. You can override message with whatever you want. I like always to have a timestamp, and of course you can always turn off the watermark. Accessories. This is for IR accessory that you can buy for about $70, and I have already installed one. I'm going to install more of these because I like what I saw. After you install the accessory to the camera, you would have to enable it here and save it. And RSTP service. If you know what RSTP is, then you can run with these settings. So that's the first menu. Recording. I usually have it recording on motion. I usually set it up for 2 seconds at least of motion because I don't want every fly and mosquito setting off the motion recording. And I have it to about 25 seconds after. Usually for customers, when I set up custom servers, I do 5 to 10 seconds before and about 35 seconds after, depending, because if you want to catch as much as possible, then you want to catch as much as possible. These settings can be adjusted to whatever you really want. All right, let's save this recording. Okay, and zones, you can configure the zone. See how I configured my zone to record all this for motion? So it doesn't really record anything over here, and the sensitivity is at 80%. You can play around with these settings. It really depends on your desires, unique deployments, because every place is different, every hallway is different. It is what you want to get out of the system, but it's very flexible. Okay, let's look at the stats. That's just the stats of the camera, really. That's for nerds if you want to dig in. The IP address and the alias I gave it, and that's pretty much it.